Our speaker tonight.
I'm Griffin, I'm a recovering addict. I would like to thank God for Narcotics Anonymous as well, and the man I'm about to introduce. His wife said I got 3 minutes, so I'm going to try to make it quick. Because I could introduce him for a minute. That's how big, much of a part he's been in my life and my recovery. About 3 years ago is when I first met Stephen. I met him. I got a sponsor. My sponsor was like, "Hey, you should probably call this guy Stephen. He could help you out." And I remember sitting on this like picnic table outside of my barn in a place called Raccoon Valley, Tennessee. My legs were getting eat up with mosquitoes, and I'd just be on the phone for like 45 minutes with Stephen, just going in, sharing, you know. And from there, like, we started to build a relationship. He taught me how to network. He really helped me work a second step. I share this all the time. Is when I was so scared when I came to Narcotics Anonymous that I would come to a meeting and see a parking lot like full of cars and be like, "Nope," and turn around, right? And I would drive 30 minutes the other way to find the meeting that had like 4 cars in there. And Steve was like, "Bro, just come and meet me at Rockford. Come and meet me." And I would come to a meeting, and I remember like having my head down in my car and like calling Steven, like, "Yo, bro, I'm here at the meeting." He'd be like, "Griffin, look up." And he's like standing in front of my car, like just to walk me through those doors, to help me do something right that I could never do alone. You know, to carry the message to the addict who still suffers, which was me. You know, and also he's been there. Man, I talked about growing up last night, like this. I've got to see this dude grow up and be an example, a man amongst men, right? I remember when he was living, you know, with the 3 roommates and just started over in the steps to now I got to see him pursue like a relationship with God, a relationship with his fiance and now his wife, to buying a home, to just being this amazing example and this hope shot for me. You know, I remember us like passing back and forth speaker tapes, you know what I mean? Like, "Bro, you got to listen to this speaker tape. You got to listen to this speaker tape." I'm like, "You got to listen to this one." You know, and now we get to meet up like this. You know, he moved to Charleston, but Knoxville still claims him. You know, so he's going to say Stephen from Charleston, but he's a Tennessee boy at heart. But now we get to meet up, you know, and service engagements like this, you know, and that's another thing. I've got to see Stephen be a treasurer of Knoxville's convention, be very active in area service, in home group. He helped me start my home group in the living room, you know. And but most of all, he taught me that that's a position of the heart, you know, and his willingness to serve and to just show up and be the change that he wants to see, you know, and that's really what it's all about. And man, I love you, bro. Is that 3 minutes? Okay, but bro, I love you. Come up here.
Grateful recovering addict named Stephen. The reason I introduce myself as a grateful recovering addict is it's not to say that I'm any different, I'm any better. If you listen to our readings, it says we are a group of recovering addicts who meet regularly to help each other stay clean. And the reason I like to introduce myself as a recovering addict is because addict has such a negative connotation to it that the stigmatism that goes toward it is being perpetuated into society. So by me introducing myself as a recovering addict, what I'm doing is I'm removing that stigmatism from my thought process. Because the thing is, I'm not the same addict I was when I walked in the door. I'm recovering from the disease of addiction today. I did some messed up stuff. But today I get to make amends for that. I was talking to a sponsee earlier, you know. I was up in my head, and you know how this disease likes to talk, and it says, "You ain't shit, you ain't got nothing to say, why are you even there? Nobody wants to hear you. Doesn't matter what you've been through." And I was talking to that sponsee, and he was dealing with some stuff, man, and the stuff he was dealing through, you know how God always uses that two-way street of sponsorship to really just get you right. It ain't so much about me helping him. It's about God sending him to me to say, "Hey, why don't you look at this?" And I remember saying to him, I said, "Man, you know, we strive for perfection, and when we fall short, we want to beat ourselves up. But the literature tells us that we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection." And my first sponsor taught me that there's no problem with striving for perfection. It's having the unrealistic expectation that you will achieve it. Be able to accept the fact that you will fall short, and when you do, work on that area to do better next time. Because the Serenity Prayer tells us the wisdom to know the difference. The only way you get wisdom is by fucking up. I can read the book, I can have the knowledge, but the application process is where the work comes in. I know what the literature says. Do I know how to apply it? No. But God grants me the ability to be able to do it over and over again. And the Rooms of Narcotics Anonymous gives me the ability to fuck up and be loved. I went to a workshop earlier, and it was the service workshop, which my first sponsor, man, he told me at 60 days you need to chair a meeting. You need to do coffee. I'll never forget my first commitment. My sponsor told me, he said, I want you to go down to the clubhouse, because this is when I was in Tennessee living in the halfway house. He said, I want you to go down to the clubhouse when there's no meeting going on. I want you to take all the chairs out. I want you to sweep. I want you to mop. I want you to put all the chairs back, and I want you to go back to that meeting and not say a word. And I was like, all right, I'll do this. Did it. And while I was doing it, man, I felt so great. I felt like, yeah, man, I'm really doing something good. And then I go to that meeting, and not a single one of you motherfuckers said how nice the floors look. And I remember I listened to my sponsor. I didn't say nothing. I go back to the halfway house. I call my sponsor. He said, how was the meeting? I said, it was bullshit. He said, why was it bullshit? I said, not a single fucking person said a word about the damn floors. He said, how'd you feel while you were doing it? I said, I felt great. He said, that's what doing the right thing for the right reason feels like. And not expecting something in return. Because I didn't realize that when I was trying to help you, that I had already set an unrealistic expectation on you to give me some type of praise. That I wasn't really doing it out of selflessness. I was doing it out of a people-pleasing motive to make myself feel better about who the fuck I was, because I couldn't stand up and be like, this is me. Oh. So I got my literature up here. And the reason I got my literature is because Narcotics Anonymous is our literature. Like, I can come into a meeting and I can share a lot of Gucci sounding fucking theory. But the thing is this was wrote to get me here. I don't forget where I came from. I thank the predecessors and I thank the newcomer. And the reason I continue to thank the newcomer is because, number one, you show me that I never have to live like that again. And number two, you let me know that it didn't get no better. And the third thing is, you bring in an aspect of God that I have not seen in a long time. Because it's easy for me to be in these rooms and get all spiritual, but when I see a newcomer coming in shaking with fear and see that light turn on, God is using somebody with 2 days clean to reignite my passion for this program. So I'm going to read out of the 12th step. It talks about the principle of unconditional love is expressed in our attitude. Anyone who reaches out for help is entitled to our compassion, our attention, and our unconditional acceptance. Any addict, regardless of clean time, should be able to pour out his or her pain in an atmosphere free of judgment. Most of us have found that we are able to feel great empathy for those who suffer from our disease precisely because it is our disease. Our empathy isn't abstract, nor is our understanding. Instead, it is born in shared experience. We greet each other with the recognition reserved for survivors of the same nearly fatal catastrophe. This shared experience, more than anything else, contributes to the atmosphere of unconditional love in our meetings. The reason I share that is my mother went to Narcotics Anonymous for 5 years, high. And the reason I know was because I was serving her dope before she went to the meetings. And she would go to the meetings and she would come home and she would be so excited. And I'd be like, these motherfuckers don't know nothing because she's high as shit. But what I didn't realize, right, is the principle of unconditional love that we express in our meetings provided her a safe place to show up high. Because sometimes I ain't got to be clean for you guys to work in me. Sometimes that seed has to be planted in some stale soil before it can get fertilized and begin to grow. If it hadn't been for my mother going to those meetings, one of you guys wouldn't have come to my house and 12-stepped me while I was trapping dope. one of you guys wouldn't have came in and sat down with me where I continued business as usual, right? I wasn't stopping. You're just some dude coming to talk to me about how I need to do something different, change my life and do better. But what you had was the empathy. You spoke to me and I knew you understood. You said something to me and I didn't know how you felt it. Because you were clean. You had a truck. You wasn't wanted by the police. You could pee in a cup. Your friends answered when you called. You know what I mean? Like, people just showed up to say, hey, not like, what you got? And that man said something to me, and to this day, I don't know what he said, I don't know what he did, but I know this man had me crying in my living room. You ever thought you was dope boy fresh with a pistol in your pocket and thought you were really running shit until a man comes in and says some shit and just breaks you down? I didn't feel so tough then. And for some reason, God granted me the ability to try something different. So it talks about also in the 12th step, because we hear about people sharing their story, right? And I remember I was asked to share a while back, and I was like, what do I talk about? And what's cool is the literature actually had a lot of answers to any type of question we got. It's pretty cool. It also says in the 12th step, it says, now we must ask ourselves, just what is the message we are trying to carry? Is it that we never have to use drugs again? Is it that through recovery we cease being likely candidates for jails, institutions, and an early death? Is it the hope that any addict can recover from the disease of addiction? Well, it's all of this and more. The message we carry is that by practicing the principles contained in the 12 steps, we have had a spiritual awakening. Whatever that means for each one of us is the message we carry to those seeking recovery. My clean date is March 8th, 2012. But that wasn't the first time that I showed up to Narcotics Anonymous. And it wasn't the first time I showed up to any 12-step fellowship. So I'm going to tell you a little bit what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, this is a beautiful journey. So I was born to two addicts, right? Dad sold drugs, mom did drugs. That's just how it was. And I remember at a young age, like, I always craved some type of attention, and the attention I was looking for was from my parents, but it was always absent. And the reason it was always absent was because they were focused on the drugs. And I want to sit here and say it was absent. The love wasn't absent. My expectation on how I thought they should love me wasn't being met. Because they still loved me. They just didn't love me the way TV told me they should, or the way grandma said they should, or the way the kids at school said their parents loved them. I was always comparing. And in the first step out of the flat book, it talks about, is our disease bad enough that it doesn't require comparison? And the reason it asks that question is because anytime I find myself in comparison, that is me being able to identify disease thinking. Because I'm okay that I don't have to compare anything I got to anyone else. So what ended up happening, right, was I was seeking attention from my family growing up at a young age, and I ended up going to church with my grandparents. And I loved it, right, because I was the little kid running around. People give me candy. They'd say how cute I was, and I always loved it. I always enjoyed it. It was something fun. Until I ended up getting sexually abused by a member of the church. And the reason I share that is because a lot of people come in here with, I don't like God. Well, guess what? I didn't like God neither. But what happened was, is through the 12-step process, I got to find Him and got to know Him. So what ended up happening was, after that happened, I was like, I don't want that negative attention anymore, so I'm going to do something different. When I started doing something different, I started doing breaking and entering, vandalism, and getting in fights. I got attention from my parents when the police brought me home. When the police brought me home, my parents would give me that negative attention and beat the hell out of me. And they would say, you can do whatever you want, just don't bring the cops around. I said, okay. So, I had a brother that was 4 years older than me. My brother introduced me to alcohol and a couple other little drugs. And what's funny is my brother went on to become a narcotics SWAT officer in Shreveport, Louisiana. Reason I say that is y'all remember Bugs Bunny? He got left at Albuquerque. That's what happened. And so I remember my brother had a kid at a very young age, and he ended up moving out. And I remember I started like trying to fit in with my dad. And when I say trying to fit in with my dad, I would help him do whatever he needed to do. And I remember one time, I look at it as a bonding moment way back when, but through the 12-step process, I was able to see how sick I was at such an early age to try and just feel accepted and loved. My dad ended up ripping off some dope boys. Something happened. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember my dad giving me a gun and putting me up somewhere, and he told me that when this man pulls up, I want you to keep this gun on him. And if anything happens, I want you to pull that trigger. And I remember at the age of 13 just waiting for this man to do something so I could pull the trigger and prove myself to show that I am a son, I am worth something, and I am a man. And I remember in that moment feeling so good, like my father actually needs me. And he never needed me before, but in this moment, right, I could stand up, I could show up, I could say I am worth something. And I didn't have to pull the trigger, man. But I'll never forget the feeling that I felt of how ready I was. And didn't even think twice about it. After that ended up happening, man, I got into selling dope. And when I started selling dope, my dad wanted more and more to do with me. He told me at a young age, I asked him, I said, man, can I keep the dope at the house? He said, yeah. He said, but if I want some, I get it. I said, okay. And then I realized my dad had a pretty big problem, so I had to start storing it elsewhere. But what ended up happening, man, is, before, I went to school, I played varsity sports, I graduated with honors and distinction. I was a good student, and I was doing all these things, right, to try and gain the acceptance and love from my parents in any way I could, and the only thing that I ever got was when I started selling dope. My dad said, I'm sick, and I said, I got you. And what I didn't realize at the time that I realized through the 12-step process, right, is that taught me at a young age that nobody wants anything to do with you unless you have something you can bring to the table. If I ain't got something to offer, you ain't got no love for me. You can say you do, but we all know you don't want nothing to do with me unless I can give you something. And I continued to live that way for a very long time. I graduated high school. I got a scholarship to Middle Tennessee State University, and I went there, and people always ask me, they were like, what were you going to school for? And I was like, I was going to school for nuclear medicine, but I ended up majoring in drug dealing. And what ended up happening was 2 weeks before school started, I got arrested 4 times. That's before school started. I was up there 2 weeks, and I got arrested 4 times. I don't know how you do that, but I did it. So I remember, man, when I was living up there, I ended up doing what we do, selling drugs, going to jail, getting in fights, all sorts of fun stuff. And Tennessee Bureau of Investigation came, and they kicked in my door, and they came inside, and they did what they do, which is fuck my life. But see, after some step work, I can say I fucked my life, and they helped save it. You know what I mean? And I remember, and the reason I share some of these stories is because we all come into the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous carrying guilt and shame. And I remember my father came up to take me to court. And any of you that have ever been to jail and have to go to court, anybody who's willing to come that has bail money is more than welcome to come. And so my father was taking me to court, and I didn't know what was going to happen. But for some reason, God decided that I didn't need to go to jail that day. And I remember riding back to my apartment, and my father said to me, he said, you need to do something different. You need to change your life. You need to quit doing what you've been doing your entire life. I remember getting angry at him and cussing him up one side, down the other, getting out of the truck and walking away. That was the last time I saw my father. He overdosed and died a couple weekends later. And I share that because nobody wants to come in here and say how the last words they said to their father was, you're a motherfucker. About how my pride and ego would not let me listen. About how I already knew everything. I buried my father, and I remember this. I took off my suit coat. I threw the dirt on his grave, and 6 months later, I went to the cemetery looking for him and couldn't find him. And the reason I couldn't was because I was so high, I don't remember any of it. So what ended up happening was, life continued to get worse. I mean, I continued to go to jail. I continued to pick up charges. I mean, shit happens. Like, I got my jaw broke with a steel fucking pipe. You know what I mean? And I still called the dude afterwards talking shit. Before I went to the doctor, right, I got loaded, went to the doctor, they loaded me up some more, and the whole ride, right, to go have surgery that was like 3 hours, I was negotiating with an ambulance driver to stop and get us breakfast. Like, and that was normal to me. That's what we do. I went through the drug court process, lied, kind of manipulated the entire time. Graduated in the fastest amount of time as you could. I got asked to come back and speak while I was high as hell for drug court. And the reason is because I know what to say, I know what to do. I can manipulate the shit out of anybody. So it's easy to come in here and talk fast and live like shit. We always talk about it. I can get up here and share like Shakespeare and live like shit. My wife, when she met me, she thought I shared like Shakespeare and lived like shit. My wife got to know me and she told me that she was surprised. Which she didn't realize. I was like, shit, me too. But what ended up happening, man, is I remember the last day I used. I got arrested again for selling, delivering narcotics, and I was waiting. I had talked to the guy who came and 12-stepped me in my home, and I was waiting to go to treatment. And of course, just like any good addict, I'm going to treatment, so it's time to, really just give it all I got. So I did. 2 detectives showed up to my house. I intervened outside before they could get to the house. And I remember talking to them, and they said, you're still on probation, aren't you? I was like, well, yeah, ever since I was like 14. So, yeah, I'm still on probation. Nothing's changed. So they call my probation officer down. Probation officer shows up. I'm leaving for treatment in an hour, right? I'm like, come on, man, like for real? Like, y'all already know that I'm going to jail. Like, I don't even know why we're doing all this. Probation officer comes in, asked me to pee in a cup. She said, are you going to pass? I said, no. She said, what are you going to fail for? I said, everything but meth, and that's because meth is a terrible drug. Oh, damn. That's a whole nother story in itself. We're not even going to talk about it. But I pee in this cup, right, and fell for everything except meth, like I said I would. And she looks at me and she says, if you can promise me that you'll never fail another drug test for me again, I'll let you go. And the answer in that situation to any high drug addict is, of course. So I leave to go to treatment. I get picked up by some guys in a halfway house, halfway to the treatment center, because they're going to drive me the rest of the way to the treatment center. As they're driving me to the treatment center, they're fucking with me, saying they know where to get any type of drug that I want, and then never want to take me to get it and fuck with me the entire hour drive, thinking that I'm going to be able to score a little bit more before I get there. And oh yeah, it wasn't funny then. And so I get there, man, and I'd been to treatment centers multiple times. I could have saved a lot of money by just going to Narcotics Anonymous. Treatment is just a part of my story, and that's why I talk about it. And I remember when I got there, I had my attorney in my ear calling me saying, man, why don't you come back here and talk to these cops a little bit? That way we can, help you with some of these charges you got coming up. And I don't know why, but for some reason I told my attorney, I said, man, all you got to argue for me right now is bad points. Why don't you give me a little time and I'll give you something good to say. And I did that. I I just continued to work on myself. For the first 9 months of my recovery, my prayer life was, God, please don't let me go to jail. Let them drop the felonies to some misdemeanors, and, I'll be happy with that. Amen. And guess what? I got convicted of felonies. I didn't have to go to jail. But what it taught me was God doesn't give me what I want, but He always provides. Because sometimes I don't know what I need, but I know what I want. And sometimes my wants need to be pushed to the side. Old timer told me when I got here, he said, you're gonna have to quit doing some things you kind of like to do and start doing some things you really don't want to do if you want to get better. And I remember when I first got clean, they said you need to get a sponsor. So I got a sponsor. And then they say you need to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. My sponsor reiterated that if I'm not looking for a job, I'm in a meeting. And my sponsor told me, he said, you apply for the job as bank president, but settle for the job with the chicken on the hat. And that's what I did. I applied for every job. He said, it's not your job to find you a job. God will find you a job. It's your job to apply. Doesn't matter what I want to do. I'm living in a halfway house with no money. I need money. I got to pay rent. I got to learn how to become a productive member of society. So as I continued to do this, make meetings, and call my sponsor on a regular basis, things started to get better. The program talks about how this is a program of attraction rather than promotion. My mother that I used to serve all the time, and she was going to these rooms, she was still getting high. I didn't want to talk to her. She would call me, I wouldn't answer. Because she was still getting high, and she was one of my biggest using buddies, and I didn't want to talk to her. One of the most profound things that I remember my sponsor saying to me is, you need to answer the phone because this might be the only opportunity you ever have to be a son. I didn't realize what that meant at the time. So I answered the phone, right? I would answer the phone. She would be high, blabbing like we all do when we're nice and turned up, for real. And I would say hello, I would set the phone down, and I would walk away, and I would come back, and I would pick it up and say, yep, and I would set it down, and I would walk away, and I would come back, and I did that over and over and over again. But as I continued to work in this process, right, my tolerance, my empathy, and my understanding began to grow. Because the step work process is going to change you without your permission. The step work process is going to give you spiritual principles that you start practicing before you know that's what they are. I don't have to believe that the program works. I can see it works by this room full of people. And so I would continue to pick up the phone and answer. And as that relationship continued to grow, I continued to talk to her more and more and more. I would go back home and visit, and the only place I would see her was at a meeting, and she knew that. If she met me at a meeting, we could go to a meeting together. And I would see her there. I'm not going to your house. I'm not picking you up. I will meet you at the meeting because Narcotics Anonymous had already taught me if I want to get to a meeting, y'all got me. I can't, we can. So during this process, right, like my mother, what I didn't realize what I was doing is I was sharing my life with my mother. I was like, hey, Mom, I got a job. Hey, Mom, I got a car. Hey, Mom, I'm moving out of the halfway house into a duplex with a couple people in recovery. Hey, Mom, I just got 9 months clean. My mother ended up continuing to go to the fellowship, and they continued to love her unconditionally because that's what this fellowship is about. We don't care. You come high, please. Because we're going to show you you don't have to do it again. So I remember my mother went away to treatment unbeknownst to me, and I went to a meeting that I would normally meet her on the weekends because it was a 3-hour drive to where my mom lived. And I go to the meeting and I'm looking for her and I'm calling her and she's not answering, and I'm like, my mind automatically goes to the worst. What's she doing? And the meeting tells me that my mother decided to go to treatment. I said, how did she get cigarettes? How did she get, all these things that we feel like we have to go to treatment? Like, I need a toothbrush, toothpaste, underwear, deodorant. You ain't wore that shit in 3 months, and you saying you need it now. I don't like hard bristle. I need soft bristle. Shut up. But here's what happened, right? The love of the fellowship and the members of Narcotics Anonymous made sure my mother had everything she needed to go. Some of the members went out of their own pocket to make sure that my mother was okay. Because they showed up when her pride and ego wouldn't ask me for help. So my mother went away to treatment and she came back and I got to experience my mother clean. That's one of the most beautiful gifts that this fellowship has ever given me, was a vision to see my mother not high. I'd never had that. Never. So guess what? When she wasn't high anymore, I would meet her before the meeting. We would go out to dinner after the meeting. We would sit and we would talk recovery. And she would just talk, and I would talk back. And I would think that she had no idea what the hell she's talking about, because I've been here like 9 months and you're wrong. I know some shit. You just need to listen. Don't you know who the fuck I am? And the reason I say that is because I got the lovely joy of working in treatment and dealing with high newcomers coming in. Hey, pal. But what ended up happening, right, was as we continue to stay clean in this process, we're able to start being functional members of society again. I got my mother a Christmas present. I'm going to tell y'all what it is. It sounds corny as shit, but it's fantastic to me. I got her a Bon Jovi CD. She loved John Bon Jovi, don't ask. It was like some holiday edition. It was hey, I spent like $35 on it. And so I got it for her, and I go to see her on Christmas, and I swing by her house, and I go up, knock on the door. She answers the door, and she's high, man. And I set the present down. I said, I love you. I give her a kiss, and I leave. And the relationship goes back to the way it was, to where I answer the phone. And the reason is because through the 12-step process, I had to learn how to take care of me. I had to learn how to set up boundaries, even when it hurts. Because I can't save you. So my mother was using, and what ended up happening was when I got closer to a year clean, I asked my mother, I said, hey, I want you to come up to Knoxville. I want you to come up. I want you to stay with me over the weekend. I want you to come to my celebration, and I want you to meet everyone who helped me save my life. I was so excited. I sent money for her to a guy in the fellowship down there to drive her up and take her back, everything. And March 6th, 2013, I got a phone call that my mother overdosed and died. I'll never forget. I was at work. I told my boss. My boss said, I'm going to let you go home. And I remember the first thing I did was I picked up my phone and I called somebody. And when I called them, they just happened to be right next door to where I work, picking up materials from a Home Depot. I had to drive less than 200 yards to go find another recovering addict to just talk to. Then I drive home and I live with 2 recovering addicts, and they didn't have to work that day. I go to a meeting and they said, does anybody have anything, a burning desire? I raised my hand. I said, my mother overdosed and died this morning, and I don't want to get high today. Help me. And I'll never forget what an old timer said to me, and it made me so mad in that moment, but what I didn't realize is he said, can you look for God's blessings in this moment? Can you quit being so selfish and look for the blessings that God's trying to give you instead of thinking about what's been taken away? My attitude was, fuck you. That was a spiritual fuck you, by the way. What happened was I went back home and, I showed up. I got to make all the arrangements for my mother's funeral. Me and my brother were going to pay for the whole service ourselves, and I had worked enough and been able to be smart enough with finances enough to be able to pay for my mother to be buried. Out of respect for my brother, he wouldn't let me do that, and we can only afford to cremate her. I get a phone call right before we signed the papers from a family member who didn't care anything about my mother and really never showed up much in my life, and said, if you could bury your mother or cremate her, what would you do? Call me back. I called him back. I said, that was a dumb question. He said, make the arrangements, I'll pay for it. Because, we talk about how we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. But the thing is, if I ain't looking for him, I ain't going to see him. If I continue to think that God doesn't show up in my life and don't continue to look for where God does show up in my life, I'm going to miss it. And the only person I'm cheating is myself. Like, I don't like God. God is such a big problem. Like, man, leave whatever religious belief fucked you up in the past. We talking about God, good orderly direction, group of druggies, anything greater than yourself. Go into the ocean and tell me you got more power than that. So what ended up happening was I'm down here, I make all the funeral arrangements, everything like that, right? My mother died on March 6th. My clean day is March 8th. Narcotics Anonymous showed up, drove 3.5 hours to come not only support me through my mother's funeral, but to make me walk across the street and celebrate. Because once again, can I praise God in this moment? Anybody can praise God when shit's going good, but can you praise God when it hurts? When the pain is so hard that you don't want to do anything but get high, can you say, thank you, God, for this? Because every experience I went through wasn't for nothing. And if I believe it was for nothing, then I'm going to be living a very sad life. Don't be. I love that baby. I love that baby. Y'all don't even know. So, what I realized and what God decided He was going to teach me on that day, right? Remember when I said that nobody wants anything to do with me unless I have something to bring to the table? Narcotics Anonymous drove 3.5 hours for no reason. I did not ask you. I did not want your fucking help. And you showed up without my permission. Y'all is rude. Y'all is pushy. And y'all love me. You know what I mean? And I'll never forget that. Because that's when I understood what that reading was talking about out of the 12th step that I never had seen before. When my mother was going to meetings high and y'all loved her anyway. When the dude comes in and nods out in the corner just to get a sheet signed and y'all love him anyway. That's what this is about. Unconditional love. And I'm not going to go on a tangent, but guess what? In religion, that's the number one rule too. Just like we don't follow it in Narcotics Anonymous every time, they don't follow it over there every time. Now I'm going to leave that alone. So what ended up happening, right, was my mother passed away. I go to the police station. Pick up my mother's belongings. I asked the officers, I said, did you search this? They said, yeah. I walk out, I turn around, I walk back in. I said, do you mind if I search it? They said, no, go ahead. So I search it and I find enough dope to kill me and 2 more of y'all. Easy. And I give it all to him, and this detective looks at me and he said, I never would have thought this in a million years. I said, what do you mean? He said, every time we asked you if you had dope, you always said no, and now you're sitting here handing it to us? Yeah. And I remember saying this to him, and I'll never forget it. I said, why in the fuck would I want to do the same shit that's put me in this position where I just had to bury my mother? And I remember leaving, getting in the car, and I'm driving back, and I'm fucked up. My stomach's turning. It's like I'm dope sick all over again. I call an old timer, and I said, man, I just found all the dope, and I turned it into the police. He said, okay. I said, why do I feel so wrong? He said, because you're not used to doing the right thing. And I was like, well, shit, that's real simple. Okay, talk to you later. Well, damn. Okay. Anyway, so what continued to happen, man, was I continued to just get in the middle of the boat. And the reason I got in the middle of the boat is they taught me is if I'm in the middle of the boat, it's harder to fall out. The reason I was in the service workshop is because I am the PR chair for my area. And the reason I am is because I know that if we don't continue to carry this message to the sick and suffering addict, that we're going to continue to die. I gave my basic text away. And the reason I gave my basic text away is because somebody needed one and they didn't have one. And the basic text that I have today is my mother's. How many of y'all got a book from treatment that was signed by everybody you was in treatment with? I know everybody got one. A lot of people got them. I bought them from McKay's bookstore because y'all needed money for something. But the reason I carry this book is because through the step work process, I continue to find out that a lot of my resentments that I still carry come from a relationship that I had with my mother from where I had unrealistic expectations placed. But the good thing is these people got to see my mother in that light that I always want to continue to see her. So I'm able to open this book and I'm able to read it. And this is a true vision of what my mother was instead of what my mind makes her out to be. Now I'm going to talk about God again. If God bothers you, I apologize. There's a guy who asked me if I could help him. I sent him to, I got him into a treatment center, and he went, and he ended up going back out, but he's clean today, has 3 years, holds an H&I commitment, and is doing very well. And the reason I mention him is because when I sent him to treatment, I had no idea where he was going. I just know he needed help. And what I didn't realize until after my mother died is in the back of this book, it says, Doris, it has been great getting to meet you. Now I know where Stephen gets his big heart. Please stay clean because it will break my heart if you don't. I sent this dude to a treatment center in Florida and had no idea that he was going to be in the same room with my mother and is the only person in Narcotics Anonymous who got to meet her. That's a long way away for two people to show up that mean so much to me at one location. So when I start looking for God, I see it. But the thing that always scares me about God, right, is being uncomfortable. There's a part in the Living Clean book that talks about, let's see if I can find it. Where's that? Here we go. No. The faith that leads us to build a successful life may not be sufficient to sustain that day after day. A new kind of surrender is necessary if we are to stay clean and keep growing. Spiritual growth can be bewildering, frightening, and very lonely. That's a lot of big words. And the way it's worded can be confusing. So something that I try to do is I try to illustrate some of these big things into something simple. All right? You guys ready for something simple? Something simple. I'm over here talking to this group of people. This is where I'm comfortable. I went to treatment with you. I lived in the halfway house with you. You guys know me. You love me. You were there with me at the bottom, at the low point. You're my ride or die. But this dude over here is doing something different. I don't know what it is about him, but something about his spirit, something about what's going on has got me wanting to know more. So I'm going to continue to walk toward him. Because I want what he has, but you guys are over here. So I'm going to get to the middle, and when I'm in the middle, guess what? I'm alone. I'm frightened. I'm bewildered. Because to continue moving forward something that's the unknown and get something that I never thought plausible, the fear causes me to want to shrink back to what I'm comfortable with, to what I'm used to getting bare minimum. But as I continue to walk forward toward what I want and be able to let go of the past and the old things and the comfortability of where I've got to, am I able to truly spread my wings? There's a song that talks about, don't tell me the sky's the limit when there's footprints on the moon. When I got here, I had no idea what was going to happen. I just knew I didn't want to get high again. So what ended up happening was God placed some people in my life to take me to grounds I never thought possible. So now I'm going to talk about where I was in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous and I was a hoe. Yeah, hey, it says on here, Stephen C. Main ballroom, main speaker. That's what it says. I was a hoe. And the reason I shared that is because I ain't a hoe no more. Y'all acting like I did something. I didn't do shit. What happened was I would continue to go to meetings and I would seek things outside myself to change the way I feel. Because it talks about in the literature, we deal with the disease of addiction, not a simple substance, right? Drugs are but a symptom. So my attitudes and behavior are really kind of what got me into the shit anyway. So what ended up happening, was I would seek relationships. I would call them relationships. But what would happen is I would seek relationships and I would describe lust, or I would confuse lust with love. And the reason is because I had no idea what love really was, because I was never shown it in the way that was healthy. So what I continued to do was, my sponsor told me, he was like, it's suggested that you don't get in a relationship within the first year of your recovery. He said, now with that being said, you're going to do whatever you want to do. Just remember you don't have to get high. And so I heeded that. I didn't get in any relationships for the first 9 months, and all it took was being in the halfway house with a bunch of guys who said, you scared of pussy, to make me change my mind. You want me to get real? You want me to get honest? I'm going to get real honest. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I was working steps. I could say some really good stuff. I could tie it all together. I was good with words, I guess. And what ended up happening was I ended up circling up at the end of a meeting, and I'm praying with 6 girls that I've done, yeah. You know how awkward it is to take my wife to my old area and circle up and pray? I'm like, I hope they don't come talk to me. And that's real. And I remember the first time I told her, I was like, I was a hoe. She was like, damn it. But what ended up happening, was I continued to use that to change the way I felt. And as I continued to use that to change the way I felt, just like the dope quit working, that quit working. And when I say that quit working is, let's talk about me having 2.5, 3 years clean. I'm at a meeting, and after the meeting, they're like, hey, you want to go out and, eat, do this, do that, do whatever? I'm like, no, I'm going to go work on step work. When I say go work on step work, I went and picked up a little 18-year-old girl that I had met at another fellowship that I attend, and pretty much told her straight up, because we're really good at making agreements, because I didn't hurt nobody if we made an agreement, because you knew that all we was doing was this. But what I didn't realize, was my sponsor told me, he said, all these negative feelings and energies and low self-esteem and feelings of low self-worth that you have? He said, why are you going to take all of those feelings and put it into someone else? He also said, why don't you just pay for it? At least they know what's happening. So I don't know if anybody's ever experienced this, but I'm going to talk about it. I remember that night, right, after saying I was going to do step work. I go pick up this little 18-year-old girl because I think I'm the shit or something, or I'm a player. I don't know, whatever my mind thought then. And I take her back to my house. And I don't know if any men can relate, but when you're halfway into the process and you just decide, I don't want this. You know how awkward of a conversation it is to say, "Excuse me, can you please get off?" Then you got to have that talk that you always felt was fake when it's like, "It's not you, it's me." And I remember calling a friend of mine in recovery that night after she left because I felt so bad, and I was like, "Man, I don't know what the problem was." I was honest with her. He said, "No, you weren't." He said, "There's a big difference. Honesty comes before the fact. The truth is, you used that girl. You made an agreement? Okay. Did you say, I'm going to use you to make myself feel better? Or did you say, we're just going to have sex?" Because I told that girl, we're just going to have sex. I didn't say, I'm very insecure and don't feel good about myself, so I'm going to use you to make me feel better. I didn't say that. And then when you know it, I have to share the next morning at a convention. My topic is a courage to change. My sponsor said, "Are you taking your literature?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Leave it in the car." I said, "Why?" He said, "It's easy to hide behind the literature. It's harder to be honest." And so what ended up happening was I ended up trying to be abstinent. I ended up trying to practice a first step, because the first step talks about it. Abstinence must come first. If you don't think you have a problem with something, and I ain't just talking about drugs, try being abstinent from it and see what happens. See how your motives and how your mind and how you will manipulate things in life to be able to go shopping. To be able to have that one extra piece of dessert. And as I was continuing to practice abstinence, my sponsor asked me, he said, What are you looking for? I said, "I'm looking for a wife." He said, "Well, why don't you learn how to be a husband?" He said, "Do you know how?" I said, "I think." He said, "Well, we'll get you there." Because that same, like, there was an old timer that told me when I first got here, he said, you spent your whole life trying to make him your God instead of trying to make you his man. It wasn't about making him my God. It was about making me into the man God wanted me to be. Just like I ain't trying to make this girl be what I want her to be, I'm trying to become the man she deserves. I don't own my wife. I don't. She will be the first one to tell you. But what I try to do is I try to cherish her, love her, and respect her. And guess what? I ain't perfect, and I don't do it regularly. And that's what happens. She told me to get honest, so I'm going to share some honesty. My wife has been dealing with endometriosis. Any female probably understands what that is, but I would come home after work and my wife would be in pain. And she would be curled up and she would be wrapped up in a heating blanket. And I would come home from work and there was nothing I could say, there was nothing I could do, but just be there. I'm doing the dishes, I'm cooking dinner. My disease keeps telling me, you're being a good little house bitch. I call my sponsor, I'm resentful, I'm angry. And the entire time my wife is wanting me to show her some type of affection or love, but I'm scared to because I don't want to hurt her. But instead of telling her that, I would feed her lies. What I didn't realize is I was feeding her lies and what I thought was protecting her, but was causing harm on a deeper level. I always wanted to judge myself with my intention. But it's not the intention that's what gets it. It's the action behind it. I can have the intention to show up for an H&I commitment. I can have an intention to show up to chair a meeting. I can have an intention to show up to work on time. But if I don't do it, it's pointless. Literature talks about we make decisions all the time without meaning, and a decision without meaning is a meaningless decision. So I don't do things on accident today. I do things on purpose. And the reason I do things on purpose is because I have a purpose. So the good thing is my wife and I made it through that. She had surgery. She's no longer in pain. But the hard part is saying I lied to you for 6 months. I didn't want to tell you the truth because I was trying to protect you. Just like I told you earlier in my story that I always took care of my mom. I always took care of somebody. In previous relationships, it took a friend of mine in recovery that I had shared intimately with to say after a relationship ended, how long are you going to keep trying to save your mother with these sick women? Because what I didn't realize was the relationships that I had in the past carry on to the relationships today. And that's why the step work process is so important. Because when I get here, I have all this bullshit that's on top. But once I clear that away, I'm able to get to the root of some shit. It's easy to come here and quit lying and stop stealing. It's harder to get here and figure out why I lied and why I stole. Why do I continue to do these things? I met my wife and she lived 6 hours away. I called my sponsor and I told my sponsor I met this woman. She's amazing. She's got more time than me. And she ain't got no kids. She got a car. She got a job. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like I said, all these things. And my sponsor was like, he ran back through it with me. He said, she ain't got no kids. I said, no. He said, she got a job. I said, yeah. She got a car? Yeah. He said, does she need you? I said, no. He said, I think you should keep talking to her. I told him, I was like, I don't know if I should do it. I think it'd be a waste of time. He said, oh, well, your 4-step says that the physical aspect of the relationship that you think you're so good at hadn't worked too well for you in the past. So maybe God is putting you in a situation to be able to practice a relationship through open and honest communication and allow you to get vulnerable. I was like, okay, Spons. I dated my wife for almost a year, long distance, over the phone. It got to a point where I had to make a decision. Am I going to continue to live in Knoxville where it's comfortable, or am I going to make a change and seek something greater? Am I going to stick to what's comfortable, or am I going to seek spiritual growth? And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, when I moved, I was frightened, lonely, and bewildered. Still am some days. But the biggest thing that saves my ass is this phone. Because guess what? Y'all don't go anywhere. I guarantee you, everybody in here got a phone in their pocket. Some of y'all texting right now. So I know that you gonna see me when I text you. So needless to say, I went from living in a halfway house with no car to now I have a wife. We own a house. Own it. Like we own it. Own it. Like it's ours. Like I ain't paying rent no more. I own my car. She owns her car. She has a new car. I have a career. And I get to go in multi-million-dollar mansions by myself. If you looked at my criminal history, you would not want me in your multi-million-dollar mansion by myself. So what I'm saying is when you get here, it's going to be different. It's going to be hard. But the streets were hard, and we continue to do it. I like to use this analogy when I go to H&I because, once again, I try to make shit simple. Because this is a simple process for complicated people. So I'm going to end on this. Are you ready? Whenever you went to the dope man and you bought his dope, I mean, you did it, right? You just did it. I mean, you really didn't ask too many questions. He's just like, okay, I'm going to do this. And if it was bad, sometimes you still went back, bought more dope from him, thinking you just got a bad batch, right? All right, y'all are laughing, so I know you identify. So guess what? When you come to Narcotics Anonymous, we're your dope dealer. Only we selling hope. I'm going to give you a bag. Quit asking fucking questions and do it. I'm Stephen C. Thanks for letting me share.